How you doing? All right. Long time no speak. That's really nice. Do you know, it keeps coming through, doesn't it? I've seen it a few times. That was a different one. That's tricks. Do you know what's wrong? Okay, you do? That's rude. Yeah. Didn't do anything with this early days of the you still could. I went around the last time. One day looking back, to say, oh, he gets success. I'm now hidden down there. Happy joining in wherever it is in person. Living in the Oh yeah. Keep dropping. That was a lot. Yeah, he was howling. Working.
Good evening, everyone, and hello to everyone who's watching us online tonight as well. Thank you for joining us for what is the penultimate tech talk of this series, Building a Mentally Healthy Workplace. Before we move forward with the talk, I just need to run through a couple of housekeeping items with you. So if you're using a hearing aid this evening, then if you could pop it into the T mode. If you have a mobile phone, if we could ask you to either switch it off or put it onto silent. And finally, we don't have any fire drills planned for this evening, so if the fire alarm does go, then make your way out the nearest fire exit, and the muster point is in the large car park which you'll have passed on your way in. Okay, so on with the show. I'm delighted to welcome tonight's presenter, Ali Vondy, who is not only an instructor with Mental Health First England and Mind Apples UK, but is also the founder of Manx. For those of you not familiar with Manx, it's a fantastic mental health training agency. They promote dispelling the stigma around mental health issues while also providing lots of proactive ways to provide mental health for all. We're actually very privileged to have Ali here tonight because Manx has actually just been shortlisted for the Mental Health First Aid Awards at the Inside Out Wellbeing Awards. So incredibly passionate about all aspects of mental health, Ali learned from a very early age to keep a calm head in stressful situations. She was born and raised in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and then later was even evacuated at gunpoint in Zaire as civil war broke out. But I'm sure she would agree with me, possibly, and maybe some of you here tonight as well, that probably one of her toughest challenges was successfully raising not one, but two teenage daughters. So without further ado, I'd like to ask you to put your hands together as we welcome Ali Vondy.
Thank you very much. I have to say that anybody who knows me or who is listening online, or my husband, when he listens back to this and says, keeps a cool head in circumstances, he'll go, do you even know that woman? But yes, I do try, but I don't always succeed. I have been a primary school teacher for a number of years, so if you're living on the island and I taught your children, I can only apologise. I am a Vondy from Vondy's Garage, but I married the youngest son who had to make his own way in the world, so yes, we do pay our garage bills just like everybody else. And my husband is Neil Vondy. Just to give you a bit of background on me, my husband is Neil Vondy, and he played central defender for United, so if you've been a victim of one of his sliding tackles, I can also only apologise. So I've got all of the apologies out of the way. I really appreciate the invitation from Mountain View tonight to talk about mental health. As Lindsay said, it is something which I am very passionate about. It's something that has become very close to my heart. I work with Manx. Manx is my third baby, I guess, but it is something that I'm very passionate about, and the reasons why that is, some of those will become clear as we go through the night. I just want to ask you, when you hear the words mental health, it's not all going to be me tonight. I do want you to interact a little bit, and if you want to put some things online as well, if you're watching online, please do get involved as well. When someone says the words mental health to you, what does that bring up in your mind? What does that make you think of?
Stigma.
Stigma, okay, a feeling of not being accepted, judgmental, yeah. Anything else? Broken, something that's not quite working as it should.
Hard to prove.
Okay, hard to prove. Can you pin it down? Maybe something that's difficult to pin down. Anything else? What about emotions?
Depressed.
Okay, depressed. Maybe an actual diagnosis of something. People throw away words when it comes to mental health. People talk about many, many different things when they talk about mental health. And mental health often talked about in very hushed terms. She had a breakdown, you know. They're crackers. They don't know what they're doing. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's lost the head, or one of my favourites, she's on one. Okay? So people throw away their words when they're talking about mental health. The statement, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me," is one of the biggest lies ever told by anybody, because it's not true. I remember things that my older brother said to me when I was 10. I don't remember maybe the slap they gave me or the rough and tumble, but I remember some of the things that they said to me, not out of any vindictiveness, but sometimes words could really stick in our heads and we remember the things that people say. Maybe the unthinking, maybe the cruel things. And so words like psycho, nutter, crazy, and worse are said about people with mental health issues. And so people with mental health issues are all banded together in one fell swoop. And often the words that are referred to about mental health are negative words. Things that are negative. We go immediately to stigma and depression. Nobody said feel good or I feel great. When I asked about words for mental health, we go to a negative place. We often go to depression, anxiety, things that really are the far end of the spectrum when we're talking about mental health. So we're very negative about mental health. And those negativities make it difficult for people to talk about mental health. Make it difficult for people to come out and say what they're thinking, how they're feeling. And mental health, definition of mental health, men and women in dusty rooms in universities have spent a lifetime trying to come up with a definition of mental health. But mental health is really about, the World Health Organization has said, it's about how you think, how you feel, how you behave, whether or not you can make a contribution to society, whether or not you feel useful, whether or not you can cope with the challenges that come to you. And because of that stigma, just like this gentleman said, because of that stigma, people are reluctant to come forward and say how they're feeling. People think that people who have mental health issues, they're going to go mad. Those people go mad. I've heard statements like, those people go mad and stab people, you know. And that's where the media goes. That's where EastEnders goes. When they're running a mental health storyline, it's always very dramatic and the person's always in a difficult place. But we don't talk about recovery when it comes to mental health. So that means that the teenager who is anxious and finds it difficult to get into school because they're worried about their exams is lumped together in the same place, when we use those stigmatising words, in the same place as the person with schizophrenia. Because really, they're all psychos. They all don't, they can't work it out. They're a nut job. Because those are the words, the horrible, discriminatory words that people use when we're talking about mental health. As far as violence is concerned, people with mental health issues are statistically much more likely to be the victim of a crime than the perpetrator of a crime. If you think about someone living homeless, who has schizophrenia, living homeless on the underground in London, for example, that person is much more likely to be mugged and be the victim of crime than they are ever likely to harm someone else. So there is a lot of stigma around mental health. But everybody's jumping on this bandwagon now. Everybody's talking about mental health. Celebrities are talking about it. The royals are talking about it. It's all over the media. There's campaigns for this. There's campaigns for that. So what's the big fuss? Is everybody just jumping on the bandwagon? What is the big fuss? I'm going to do a bit of true and false. I could be really mean and make you all stand up and sit down, but I'll not. Because I like my audiences to be awake, generally. Okay, so I'm going to trust that your eyes are open, so you're awake. So I'm going to just ask you to raise your hands if you think this is true, and then keep your hand. You can sit on your hands if you think it's false. So the first question, let's find out if it is a big deal or not. Is mental health really worth all the fuss that everybody's saying it is? The total cost of mental ill health in the Isle of Man is estimated at £146 million every year. Now that figure is worked out pro rata per head of population on the assumption that there is the same incidence of mental health issues on the Isle of Man as there is in the UK. So 146 million a year. That's what it's costing the Isle of Man economy, total cost of mental health issues. Do we think that's true or false? Hands up if we think it's true, hands down if we think it's false. Okay? That is false. Because it's higher. The figure pro rata population is about 167.5 million a year. Now does anybody know what one out of how many people in the UK are dealing with a mental health issue at any one time? Anybody know the answer to that? Okay, we're told it's 1 in 4. We're told it's 1 in 4. But some people have told us, one of the MHK said a little while ago in one of the papers, that it could be up to 1 in 3 people on the Isle of Man. So actually this figure could be higher, because pro rata of the population we could have more of an issue with mental health issues on this island than they do in the UK. So it could be even higher than that. Annual cost to business, we're talking about mental health in the workplace tonight mainly. Annual cost to businesses in the UK of poor mental health in the workplace is 32, not million, but billion. True or false? You think that's true? About half and half? That is also false. Because it's actually 45 billion. Between 42 and 45. But what's a few billion here and there when you're talking in billions? 45 billion. And if you look above, you'll see that the total cost of mental ill health is estimated in the UK to be £105 billion a year. That's a big number. How many hospitals, schools, teachers, doctors, nurses, firemen could be paid for with that money if we were able to use it for something else? If we were actually proactively tackling mental health like we need to. That 32 billion figure came from a report that Deloitte did back in 2017. They've recently, in January 2020, done a new report, and they now estimate that the figure is between 42 and 45 billion. That means that in the 3 years between 2017 and 2020, the total cost of mental ill health in the UK went up by 10 billion in 3 years. Now, because I'm a sad kind of individual, I'm really looking forward to seeing, well, not really looking forward, but I'm very interested to see what the post-pandemic figures are going to look like. Is that going to have made a difference? So are we going to see an even bigger increase in this figure? 40% of people with diagnosable mental illness receive no treatment at all. True or false? I think that's true. Why do you think it's false?
A lot more than that.
Sorry?
A lot more than that.
Higher. How much more do you think?
Like 70%.
Yeah. Between 70 and 75%, and that's the Chief Medical Officer's report. And that's quite an old figure actually, but that's the latest statistics we have. So there's 3/4 of people who have a diagnosable mental health illness who could come forward and get help for that illness aren't doing it. Are they not doing it because of the stigma that's attached? Because of the fear that they might be labelled in some kind of way? What do we think of that one? More people die in the world every year from suicide than from war and homicide. Murder, that was really good. Murder. Than homicide and war combined. Think that's true? It's the chances of probability. She wouldn't really have 4 falses in a row, would she? That is true. That is true. It's quite close. It's quite close. But actually, the World Health Organization estimate that 1 person in the world dies from suicide every 40 seconds. So just do a quick estimate of how many people have died around the world from suicide since we walked into this room tonight. And that can kind of put it in perspective for you. Just another little aside around this. If you look at road deaths in Britain, for example, there's about 1,700 road deaths. There was just over 1,700 road deaths in Britain in 2018. There were over 6,000 people who died from suicide that same year. How much money is spent on road safety? And how much money is spent on suicide prevention? I'm doing some training with the sixth formers on every secondary school, every high school on the island at the minute. And we look at those suicide v road death figures, and I ask them that question, and I say to them, how much training have you had in road safety? And they go, oh yes, every year the police come in before TT and they tell us, to be careful on the roads, and we've all done our cycling's proficiency, and we've all done this, and we've all done that. And then I say to them, and how much suicide prevention training have you had? Some of the things that they say aren't repeatable in this group. But really it means they haven't had any, or very, very little, because we don't talk about suicide. Shh. It's another thing that's mentioned in hushed tones. We don't talk about it. And yet we've got to talk about it, because it's been shown that in countries where people address suicide and talk about suicide, and when there's open conversation and dialogue about suicide, the suicide rates plummet. It is a myth to believe that someone, if you talk to someone about suicide, you'll put the idea in their head. You don't want to put ideas like that in their head. That's not true. That's a myth. I am a Shout crisis volunteer. And one of the things that we learn in training and we get trained to do is, if someone is thinking of harming themselves, if someone rings up, we ask, are you thinking of harming yourself? Find out. And you won't be able to find that out unless you ask. You won't know unless you ask. Men aged between 40 and 49 have the highest suicide rates in the UK. Lindsay thinks it's true. That's because she's done my course. It is true. Why did we think it was false?
I thought the age group would be lower.
Okay. It is true that young people aged between 18 and 25 have the highest mortality rate from suicide. That means that more people between 18 and 25 are dying from suicide than other age groups, but that's because they're not dying from other things. They're not dying. Their mortality rate from suicide is high because they are not dying generally from heart attacks and strokes and other things that older people are suffering from. But the highest rates of suicide, the age group, is between 40 and 49. And in this age group, our latest statistics show us that the highest profession in this, the men that work in the profession that has the highest rate of suicide is the construction industry. And two people in Great Britain in the construction, put my teeth in, 2 people in the construction industry die from suicide in Great Britain every day. Every day. So why do we think this is high? Why do we think? Generally, men don't talk. I was with a man recently who sat beside another man who was in distress. And that man went, when he was asked to ask him, was he okay? We don't do that. I can't do that. We don't do tears. We don't do emotions. We don't do crying. Some women don't do tears, emotion and crying either. But generally men don't talk. And certainly there is a very macho image around mental health. Oh, for goodness sake, grow up. Pull yourself together. Big boys don't cry this way anymore. We can wring our hands and we can shake our heads and we can raise our eyebrows and say, oh dear, this is terrible. But something has to change, because those statistics and those numbers tell us that there is an issue, and it cannot any longer be about us and them. It can't. Something has to give. And We have to have a corporate responsibility to take this on and be proactive. It can no longer be about us and them. It has to be about we. Because do you know what? We've all got mental health. It isn't about the people who have an issue or have gone for a diagnosis. Everybody's got mental health. It affects everybody. And I want to think tonight about mental health in the form of a continuum. I'm going to divide it into quarters that will roughly cover all aspects. So if you look at this axis, we're going to think about people who, at the top of this axis, are feeling perfectly fine. And if they come down here, they fall into somewhere where they're really not that happy. They're not in a good place. And then along here, we're going to put all the diagnoses. So someone who's over here is perfectly fine. They're quite happy. No problems, getting on with life. But as you come across here, you might have a bit of anxiety, a bit of depression, a bit of bipolar, and right along here to schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is one of the most difficult of the mental health issues that people are diagnosed with. So we'll have diagnosis along here, and we'll have how people are feeling up here. So I'm going to divide it into quadrants. So up here in this quadrant, you have somebody who feels fine, great, everything's okay. And that was me. Mid-90s, I was in Zaire, Democratic Republic of Congo. I was flying about in little planes with a pilot. Not flying them myself, flying about with a pilot. Visiting families who were homeschooling their kids. I was working with a relief missionary organisation, having the time of my life. Loads of new experiences, 7,000 feet up in a tropical country. Everything's great. Happy days. My husband came out. He was working as an accountant at the time. He came out. This guy from the Isle of Man appeared. He wasn't my husband then. He came and he was there to audit the books, and war broke out. First mortar was fired the day he arrived in the country. It was his fault, really. So first mortar was fired. Along he came. That was September. By December, we were evacuated. We're talking rebels, flatbed truck, AK-47s. You know, oh dear, get me out of here. Not pleasant experience. I lost everything that I had there. In fact, my husband is still very annoyed that he took a new tennis racket out there and it was lost. Anyway, not that he's bitter, but you know, tennis was important in those days. So I came to the Isle of Man. I thought, well, he asked me to marry him. I thought if he can get me out of a civil war and keep me safe, he might be worth marrying him. So I came to the Isle of Man. And I've been on the Isle of Man for 4 years. I was teaching various schools around the island. Latterly, I was teaching in Andreas, and I got pregnant 4 years into our married life. I was a teacher at Andreas, remember that. I was a Vondy, remember that, if you can forget it. And I had this baby. And anyone who's had a baby knows that the health visitor comes to call when you get home. Anybody had a baby? The health visitor comes to call? Right, what does the health visitor give you?
Advice.
Advice? She gives you a nice piece of paper as well, doesn't she? Gives you a little piece of, she asks you okay? Yeah. She looks at the baby, she measures the baby, she weighs the baby, and she says, how are you? And she gives you a piece of paper which has loads of tick boxes on it, and you've got to tick it and say, are you okay? Now, I knew this was to assess whether or not I had postnatal depression. I knew I had postnatal depression because I was teary, I wasn't coping, I was panicking, I was anxious, I had lots of things. Maybe didn't label it as postnatal depression, but I knew that things were not good. So she handed me the piece of paper. And I thought, I'm a Vondy, quite well known in the north of the island. I'm a teacher at Andreas. Am I feeling okay? Oh yeah. Am I happy? Yeah. Have I cried in the last week? No. Lie. Handed it back and she said, oh, great, Miss Vondy, you okay? Yeah. To get that woman out of my house as quickly as I possibly could. Because of stigma, fear, labelling. I did not want to be labelled as the teacher from Andreas who's had a breakdown. She used to teach our kids, you know, and she's got postnatal depression now, you know. That was all going through my head. So I showed the woman to the door. Off she went up the drive. I shut the door. I came back in. I slumped to my knees in the living room and I burst into tears with my baby beside me in the bouncer. Now I was really fortunate because I had a husband who had a good job. I was able to stay at home with my baby. So for 2 years, I managed. I was okay, but I had slipped. I had slipped into this quadrant. I was now a person with no diagnosed mental health issue, but who definitely had one. Undoubtedly had one. So 2 years later, guess what? I got pregnant again. And I had another baby. Exactly 2 years and 2 weeks later. And the night I went off on one, or lost it, in our bathroom, and threw the bathroom scales in the general direction of my husband. I didn't make contact. My husband, very fortunately, in a very quiet voice, said to me, love, I think you need to go and see the doctor. I know, I can't cope. I'm a bad mother. I can't do this. Everything's wrong. And on it went. The next morning, I got an emergency appointment with the doctor, and my doctor was amazing. Now, not everybody gets a good reception from their GP, but I got a good reception from my GP. And he normalised what I had. He said, I think you've got postnatal depression. He gave me some antidepressants. And very quickly, I became a person who had a diagnosis of a mental health issue, because I'd been diagnosed. If I had gone and if I had told the health visitor that day, I wouldn't have done this kind of dog leg. She would have probably I would have gone diagonally. She would have probably sent me straight to the doctor. But I didn't. I struggled by myself for 2 years with undiagnosed postnatal depression. And then another bout on top made it even worse. He gave me some antidepressants. I took them, and very, very quickly I began to feel normal. I wasn't comatose. I wasn't sitting in the corner of a room, totally la-la. I was just normal. I was able to leave the house without having a panic attack, or panic or worry about things all day, or be anxious about things like I'd never been before. And very quickly, I went back up here to a person with a diagnosed mental health issue who was quite fruitful and okay in their life, thank you very much, and able to cope with life. But the thing that stopped me from coming forward was the stigma. Beyond any doubt. The worry about what other people would say. Or the worry that I thought about what they might say. I might have got a better reception, but I just wasn't sure, so I was scared to come forward. Mental health is very, very rarely linear. Everybody in this room tonight is somewhere there. I'm not going to ask you, but take a minute to think where you sit on that quadrant tonight, on that continuum. Where are you? You might have been somewhere else and have moved. You might feel that you're slipping. I always say that people above the line, the horizontal line, are thriving. People below that line are just surviving or struggling. So we're all there somewhere, and we can all move around. Sometimes people slip from one to the other, but can think, right, I'm slipping. I need to go for a run, or I need to do something that will de-stress me, and they can do that themselves. So we're all on this continuum somewhere. Simon Sinek is a quite famous on TED Talks and does a lot of management training. And Simon Sinek has said, 100% of employees are people. 100% of customers are people. 100% of investors are people. If you don't understand people, you don't understand business. So people are important. And if that's true, then people should be central to our businesses. And if it's true that 1 in 6 of workers in Britain are dealing with mental health issues, then we have an issue. If it's true that the reason why it's costing businesses 45 billion a year in mental health issues is because partly we're losing 72 million working days a year to mental health issues, then we need to understand people. People are present in work, but they're not actually focused on what they're doing. They're present, they're there in their body, but they're maybe there because they're trying to avoid something that's going on at home. So their brain isn't actually in what they're doing. They're not being productive, or they're having to take time out, they're having lots of loo breaks or lots of cigarette breaks or whatever they need to do to calm themselves down. They're present, presenteeism, they're present, but they're not as productive as they could be. There are people, 1 in 5 people, pulling a sickie. Take a day off due to stress, but feel they can't say that's the reason. 90% of those people feel they can't say, I'm really dealing with something to do with my mental health here, and I just need a day to reset. And yet, it's enshrined in law. The Health and Safety at Work Act says that employers have a duty of care to look after their employees, not only physically, and there's loads of, John, health and safety at work, don't climb a ladder, don't go higher than here, don't go further than there, don't change a light bulb, don't stand at the table, don't move a chair. Loads of things about health and safety of physical health, but what about mental health? And the Health and Safety at Work Act covers mental health, but it's been conveniently forgotten about. Having disabled access to a building is no longer an optional extra. To make a long-lasting and truly effective change and a difference, our endeavours in the workplace and mental health being have to be more than just a tick box exercise. Oh yeah, we've done that course. Forget that. It has to be. It has to become part of who we are, part of our society, and it has to be our responsibility, not their responsibility. It has to be all of our responsibilities. We have to make this a whole organisational approach to mental health. It has to be an approach that starts with recruitment and how we recruit people, what we do with those people at work, what do we do with them if they show signs of distress, what happens when they're off sick, is it okay to talk to people when they're off sick, do we contact them, do we tell them that we care about them, and then how do we get them back into work safely, so that we all benefit. I know this is quite a small slide, but this comes from the Mental Health First Aid Line Manager's Resource Book, and that's freely available on my website, on manxminds.com. It's also freely available in the resources section on the Mental Health First Aid England website, so anybody can go on there and download that as a PDF. There's loads of really good resources for workplace mental health in that booklet. So it has to be an organisational level, it has to be at an individual level. It's no longer an optional extra to have disabled access, and neither should it be an optional extra to attend to people's and our employees' mental health at work. Because it's the law. It's enshrined in law, and yet somehow it's been ignored. Currently, there's a bill making its way through the UK Parliament that will bring mental health first aid on a par with physical first aid. So currently in the UK, if you're an employer and you have over 5 employees, then you're required by law to have a physical first aider. There's cross-party support to this bill that says every workplace will have to have a mental health first aider also. Someone who can speak up for the needs of employees, someone who people can go and talk to. Can I just have a show of hands if there's anyone in the room who has ever had to do CPR on someone? Well, you're a nurse, so that doesn't surprise me. Okay.
It was only the fact I was there with someone else who also could do it.
Okay, yeah. So, very few. Put up your hand if you have ever come across someone in your life who has been anxious, depressed, suicidal, or stressed. You are much more likely to come across someone who's dealing with a mental health issue than you're ever likely to have to do CPR on someone. And yet there are thousands of people across the country trained in CPR and very few people trained in mental health. And that is why I do what I do every day. Because we have to train people. Because I got in that position. I got in the position where I was in a situation where I thought, whoa, the next words that come out of my mouth, these people are going to remember for the rest of their life. And what if they're the wrong words? And at that point, even though I'd done as a teacher loads of things in child and adolescent mental health, I thought, I need to know what to say here. And that's where I turned around and started to get some training for myself. Global company Deloitte are leading the way in championing a more positive attitude towards mental health in the workplace.
Mental health used to be a topic no one spoke about. But thanks to the work of a lot of people over the past few years, that's starting to change. I believe that the workplace should positively contribute to good mental health and well-being. So I'm very proud of the steps we've taken here at Deloitte to support better mental health, both within our firm and in wider society. Firstly, we've helped our people to open up and share their own stories of mental ill health. Secondly, we've worked with Mental Health First Aid England to equip our leaders and our mental health champions with the skills necessary to spot the signs of mental ill health and ensure individuals get the support they need. And finally, we're supporting Mind through our 1 Million Futures social impact strategy. But despite the progress being made across the country, 49% of employees still don't feel comfortable talking to their line manager and workplace. This makes us better equipped to create an environment where all our employees can thrive. The 6 standards have been developed with mental health charities, leading employers and trade organisations. If every employer in the UK signed up, we would make a meaningful impact on millions of employees across the UK. It would be great if you could join us. So please get started today and visit mentalhealthatwork.org.uk/commitment. Thank you.
Those 6 standards offer us and offer employees and our employers a great roadmap to improving mental health in the workplace. Because our approach must not be an ad hoc one, where we're, oh, this sounds like a good idea, yeah, we'll do that, and then this sounds like a good idea, and then we'll do that. Things don't just happen. We need to set our priorities and then work to drive those priorities forward. The need to talk and to be authentic in those discussions in the workplace is vital. We often hear the statement, it's okay not to be okay. But it is not absolutely, definitely, categorically not okay to not be okay in so many spheres of life. It's not okay to admit that you're not okay. And even if we do pluck up the courage to say we're not okay, many people don't know what to do with that disclosure. I'm suicidal. Oh, don't be silly. Be fine. And I actually know a case where that happened last week. Don't be silly. You'll be fine. Don't be saying that. So we need to train people to know what to do and what to say using really good quality, evidence-based mental health training that will give people the skills and the tools and the confidence to know what to say and what to do when people do share with them. And then finally, we need to really objectively examine what we're doing and seek to understand if it's making a difference. And if it's not making a difference, then what do we need to change? Why is it not making a difference, and do we need to change it and help it to make a difference and to improve life in the workplace for both employer and employee? And if you're an employer here tonight, I would really, really encourage you to consider signing up to the Mental Health at Work commitment for your employees. Because we've already seen that the cost of mental health and mental ill health at work is really costly and really wide-ranging. In January 2020, as I've already said, Deloitte published a new report highlighting the huge cost of poor mental health to the workplace. By how much could the economy have expanded in those 3 years if that £10 billion had been spent, or been able to have been spent in a different way? 9 billion costs in staff turnover alone.
As consulting human capital leader with a focus on the future of work, changes in the workplace and within the workforce is of huge interest to me and the clients I work with. Deloitte has recently launched a new piece of research about mental health and well-being in today's labour market, examining changes in workplace practices which have added to poor mental health. In the context of the future of work, technology is generally very positive, a force for good, enhancing employees' experiences at work. However, our latest report shows that the increased use of technology in the workplace has negatively impacted mental health, with some pretty big implications for employers. Being present at work, but not working at their most productive. Technology has contributed to an always-on culture. Having the ability to work out of hours makes it harder for some people to maintain their mental health. An increasing number of UK employees are struggling to disconnect from work, part of a rising trend called leavism. More employees than ever are working out of hours and are not taking time off when they need to, leading to burnout. People are a business's biggest and most important asset. Creating a positive work environment is fundamental to the success of any organisation. This includes mental health and well-being in the workplace. Understanding more about the relationship between mental health and work is in all of our interests. So how can employers tackle this? Read our report to find out.
I have made up some resources for tonight, which can be made available online as well. But I've made up some resources for tonight. A few of them are on the table over there, but I have a couple of pages of links to things related to mental health and various things that we're covering tonight, but also a link to that report, for example. So if you would like me to send you the PDF resources from tonight, there's a little form over there. If you just fill it in and stick it in the basket, I will forward that to you after tonight, because that report is really, it's only 17, 18 pages long. It's not, it's not huge thick, but it is really, really interesting. And although it shouldn't all be about the bottom line, undoubtedly the bottom line has to matter. And making an investment in mental health has to improve the bottom line. Employees who feel supported and valued in the workplace are up to 12% more productive. Any line managers in the room? 12% more productive equates to 45 extra minutes from your staff a day. Would you like extra 45 minutes from your staff for free every day? Because they're spending more time actually switched into their job. For every £1 spent on mental health, that report tells us that the return, every £1 spent on mental health in the workplace, that report tells us that the employer gets £5 back in reduced staff turnover, reduced sickness absence, reduced presenteeism, reduced likelihood of grievance or discrimination claims. And that investment shows a commitment to corporate and social responsibility that actually says that where the employer is saying, our people matter to us. We care about our people. And that employers don't just want to comply with the law, but that they truly want to build a better and a healthier place to work. The result of bringing all of this together will serve to improve staff morale, commitment, engagement, performance, and retention. Show me an employer who doesn't want some of that. We need, as a society, but in workplaces especially, we need to be creating a culture of care.
I trained to be a mental health first aider because I wanted to have the confidence to know I was saying the right thing when I was dealing with sensitive situations. I've had to use my skills as a mental health first aider a few times. I feel happy that I'm able to give that support to other people because I've needed support in the past and perhaps it hasn't been as available as it is now.
For many years, we focused heavily on physical health at work, largely because Thames Water is an operational business and lots of our employees will work in physical roles and operational roles. We focus on lots of different initiatives in that strategy and it's really been important in pushing forward our agenda in terms of mental health. We record 5 mental health first aid interventions for every 1 physical health intervention. We're actually in a position now where we record 1 mental health first aid intervention every single day. Mental health first aid training and mental health first aiders in our business have been influential and been a really, really big part of our strategy, and it's been a great, great positive change in terms of how people perceive mental health in the workplace.
We have had an enormous impact as a result of our Time to Talk strategy, which deals with mental health in the workplace. The outcomes achieved have been a 75% reduction in work-induced illness over the last 5 years, which is incredible. We're creating a culture of care within the organisation, and as a result of that, our people are respecting those decisions and actually coming forward and getting more help.
75% reduction. I didn't pay him to say that, by the way. 75% reduction in work-induced illness. So, to conclude, if caring for staff is important, it follows that it's also vital that we know how to care for our own mental health. The song says it's not what you do, it's the way that you do it. That's what gets results. I'll not sing it for you because you'd definitely leave. I'd like to change that to it's not what you know, it's whether or not you do it. That's what gets results. So, if you get really stressed, what do? I've got an ex-pupil here, I'm going to pick on him. What do you do when you get stressed? Go on, tell me. To de-stress, what do you do? Okay, go for a walk. Go out in nature, take a bit of a walk, breathe some fresh air. Yeah, what else?
Go for a pint.
Go for a pint. Go for a pint. Meet up with some mates, have a chat, have a talk. Just not necessarily talk about what's stressing you, but just go out and have a bit of a chill with people. Exercise, get into nature, take your mind off it. Bit of cuddle therapy from the dog. We all know, isn't it, advertising? We don't actually do those things. On the contrary, a lot of us keep going and 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 keep going on this runaway train till you end up taking time out because of burnout or because of stress or worse, because the tyranny of the urgent presses in. These are the 5 ways of well-being. They were instituted from a report from the New Economics Foundation in 2008, so it's quite an old report now. And the New Economics Foundation wrote this report and they came up with these 5 things that are good for people's well-being, that help people's mental well-being and health. And governments all over the world, from New Zealand to the Isle of Man, have written their national well-being policies based on these 5 ways. But there's a little bit of an issue. Nobody knows them. Nobody knows that they exist. Now, if you were to type in 5 ways to well-being Isle of Man, you'd get a lovely PDF, which Lindsay's very kindly printed out and it's on the table. You can take it home and have a look at it. And it talks about these 5 ways. If you were looking at all online from the Isle of Man government during COVID, you would have seen the Are You OK campaign. Anybody familiar with that? Some of us are, but a lot of people had switched off. Once Howie had told us the numbers, we'd switched off before it got to the end bit about how to look after your mental health during COVID and the Are You OK campaign and the nice little films that came on at the end, because we'd all gone off to meet the tea by then, or put the kids to bed, or whatever else we had to do. The 5 ways to wellbeing, the Isle of Man government's Are You OK campaign, are all based around these 5 things. And you can clang yourself with them to remember them. Connecting, going to the pub, having a pint with your mates, going out with your friend, having a walk, connecting with your dog. Doesn't have to be a person, just getting that connection. And that's why we had such an issue during COVID, because those connections that are so important to our mental health, a lot of them were overnight turned off. I've done some work recently with Isle of Man Live at Home, and they had an issue during COVID because they suddenly had a lot of elderly people feeling suicidal on this island because they were cut off from the people who loved them and cared for them. They couldn't Zoom them, they couldn't FaceTime them because they didn't know and they didn't know how. And that caused an issue. So connection is really important for our mental health. These are the things, if we do them, not just know them, but do them, will make a difference to our mental health. Keep learning. We did have a bit of a Zoom-nami of learning during COVID, didn't we? A bit of, oh, we've got to do this and we've got to do that and I don't know how to do this, and Teams and Zoom and working at home, not working at home, too much. But continuing to learn and challenge ourselves is really good for your mental health. Doing the crossword every day, learning something new, changing your career when you're 54. Being active, going out for a walk, going for a run. In case you hadn't noticed, I don't run. My husband runs. In fact, he's just bought a non-electric lawnmower, a proper old-fashioned push one that he runs up and down the grass doing. because he likes to run. But I know that it's good for my mental health to go to Pilates, and I love it. But even I'm good at saying it, but I don't prioritise that sometimes because the tyranny of the important pushes in. So, being active, taking notice, just being out in nature. I was seen during COVID lying on the picnic table at 2 a.m. in our back garden watching a meteor shower. It was amazing. We live in such a beautiful place. My 17-year-old daughter wasn't very impressed when I woke her up, however, at 2 o'clock in the morning to come out and see it as well. But we'll leave that there. And giving. I don't mean you have to walk out of here and go and give thousands of pounds to some charity. Just giving of your time. Leaving a bar of chocolate on someone's desk. Giving way and letting somebody out in front of you in a traffic queue. There is an actual science to kindness, to that kind of kind giving, that says that it will release endorphins, good feelings, not only in you, but in the person you do it to, and to the people who observe that. So it's like dropping a pebble in a pond and making things different. But remember, it's not enough just to know about these things. We've got to actually actively do it. It's not enough for them to be sitting there in a nice PDF on Google. We've got to actually talk to each other and make those connections to improve our mental health. We have to take the time and the commitment to do it. Christopher Parker said, procrastination, I like this, procrastination is like a credit card. It's a lot of fun till you get the bill. We can procrastinate about looking after our mental well-being too, but it isn't much fun when the bill arrives. And it has to be paid with our mental health, or with burnout, or with stress, or worse. We've made great strides over recent years, and we're continuing to do so in the area of mental health. Increasingly, people are willing to talk, and increasingly people are willing to listen and know what to do when people talk. So if I can leave you with one thought tonight, it is, if you're struggling, reach out. Don't sit in silence and suffer in silence. If you're struggling, reach out, because there is help out there. I know the system isn't perfect, but there's lots of help out there. And if you notice someone else struggling, reach out to them. Because better reaching out to them and talking to them than not doing it and regretting it later. So if you're struggling, there is no need to be alone. Reach out. And if you see someone else struggling, reach out to them. Help is out there. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for taking part. Thank you so much for being online. Thank you, Lindsay.
Well, thank you, Raleigh. We've got a few minutes where we've got an opportunity to, if anybody'd like to put any questions to Ali. If you're watching online, then you can pop them in the chat feed and we'll do our best to read them out and get them answered. If you could raise your hand if you have any questions, and then I'll come to you with the microphone. Anybody for any questions?
Thanks so much for a great talk. Really, really good. I'm aware there are a lot of organisations on the island that really help for this subject. I'm aware of I Listen as an organisation. I just wondered, what's the difference between Manx Minds and I Listen? Because I Listen seems to provide much the same sort of services that Manx Minds do, or at least that's how I see it.
I Listen do a lot of work in schools. I do some work in schools, but not a lot. The work that I've been doing with the sixth formers, for example, gives accredited Mental Health First Aid England accreditation course to the sixth formers, so that they actually get a certificate and can put it in their CV and say, I've done this mental health. So the training that Manx Minds, I'm not sure what training I Listen provide, but the training that Manx provides is accredited Mental Health First Aid England accredited training, which has 25 years behind it, 24 countries around the world, is all evidence-based training, manual training. Alison does a lot of work in schools. I know that they have some psychologists who work for them, and they do one-to-one work with children and things like that. I don't do any of that. Manx Minds is purely a mental health training and equipping company and business. I go to the corporates, I go to the banks, I've just trained some of the new MHKs, for example. So I go around lots of places training those mental health first aiders in the workplace so that they have a better and help people to set up their own mental health policy within the workplace. Does that answer? Yeah.
Okay, anybody else in the room who has any questions? Okay, if not, we'll go to online. We've got a question from Peter.
Hi, Peter.
Peter's asking, have you any idea what proportion of the cost of mental health is non-preventable? Presumably the headline costs combine both.
Yeah, I don't actually. I don't. I'm sure if you look on that report, it might tell you. Non-preventable is an interesting term. What is preventable and what is non-preventable? I would say that there are some people who have a propensity to mental health issues. For example, I believe that my father dealt with depression for a lot of his life. So did I have a genetic propensity to becoming or getting postnatal depression because of my genetic makeup? Who knows? But certainly I think there is a lot that could be prevented from getting worse if they were given help at an earlier stage. That doesn't answer your question because I can't give you the actual statistics, but I'm sure those statistics are out there, and if you look online to the resources later, you might find some help in that Deloitte report.
Thank you. Before we close, would anybody else in the room like to ask any questions? Okay.
Thank you all.
So all that's really left for us to do now is to thank Ali. I think you'll agree there's been some really interesting and quite astounding statistics that we've heard this evening, but also lots of great solutions and strategies to how we can move forward in the workplace and support each other. So that brings tonight's to an end. Our next tech talk on the screen here is demystifying SaaS, AWS and the cloud, starting with what they mean. I had to find out while I was doing the marketing for this because I didn't have a clue. So these are going to be presented by Josh Comish, who is a DevOps engineer for the AFD group. In this talk, he's going to guide you through what cloud computing and SaaS are, how they've evolved over the last 20 years. Josh, who actually has just recently relocated to the island from the US, is going to draw on his vast experience to share his hints, tips and strategies on how you can effectively adopt cloud computing within your organisation, and then also explain some of the benefits that you might expect to see. Like this evening, it's another free event. You just need to register. Following the event tonight, you'll receive an email which has just got a feedback form. They are really valuable to us in deciding what subjects we move forward with, and also in hearing about how your experience was tonight. I'd really appreciate it if you took a moment to complete that. And I think that just about covers everything. So if I could just ask you to put your hands together one last time to thank Ali for her time tonight. And yeah, wish you all a safe journey home. Thank you for coming.
Just barely. Nice to meet you. That's good. Yeah, you made it. Thanks very much.
Do we shake hands these days? I'm never quite sure. Yes, hello.
That's it now, one.